Ladies and gents, welcome back. This has been an incredible week. All kinds of things going on, from news of learning that certain aerosol products are going to be banned in Canada, to the government, or not the government, but the Bank of Canada holding still. And we're going to get into all of this. But this is this time of week, and we've got back with us Marty up north. Welcome back, man. Thanks for joining me again.
Hey, Clyde. Good to be here. Actually, good to be here, but and I know we're going to talk about this. Boy, I almost wasn't here. Like, I almost decided at the very last minute to jump on the plane and go to Ottawa. Like, I almost feel like I'm missing again on, the trial that's going on in Ottawa. To me, I've been trying to show support for Chris and Tamara remotely, but I wish I was there to support them. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah.
Well, why don't we just get right into that? Because we're going to talk about the WD-40 thing, but I guess we could save that for the first little bit, because that's a thing that's happening in Canada, obviously. But let's get into this, because Chris and Tamara, they're both on trial right now because, well, the Freedom Convoy, and they were like the ones arrested. There was a few other people arrested during the Freedom Convoy, and across Canada too. There's the Coots 4, which they're still in jail. This is ridiculous. But we have Chris and Tamara. When the government declared a state of emergency, they couldn't prove anything. They had to go outside of the judicial purview. They had to go outside of anything to cramp down on this protest. It was peaceful people. The police couldn't do anything about it because they weren't breaking any laws, right? Parking your truck illegally isn't breaking a law. It's perhaps a city ordinance problem, but the city should be taking care of these things in other ways. But here they are on trial, and it looks like they're literally trying to go after them to put them away. How is this going to play out?
Well, yeah. Well, let's put some context. So, for me, the trucking, the convoy, the Freedom Convoy, and it's hilarious that they call it the alleged or so-called Freedom Convoy.
Yeah.
I don't know why they use those kinds of terms. It was a Freedom Convoy, and I think it was a turning point in Canadian history, and we'll talk about it for a long time, which, to come. I mean, we were heading down an ugly path, and so the Freedom Convoy occurred at the right time. But it was an embarrassment for Trudeau, and it was an embarrassment for a whole lot of people, right? I mean, after the convoy, when the convoy came to an end when Trudeau had to enact the Emergencies Act. And the reason he had to enact the Emergencies Act is we keep learning is all these, like you said, they couldn't find ways to break up the convoy because nothing the convoy was doing was illegal. So yeah, parking on residential streets and stuff like that. So they eventually had to enact the Emergencies Act, break up the convoy, and arrest people. And then again, it was a stretch what they were arresting people for, right? They arrested Tamara and Chris for, well, as you said, hundreds of others for things like mischief or inciting mischief and things like that. Now, the reason they're still being tried is because of all the hundreds of people that were arrested, everybody pleaded and accepted some plea bargain of some sort. Because, I mean, mischief carries something like $100 usually, or $1,000, or 200 hours of community work, something like this. But Tamara and Chris are doing something. They refuse to just bend and make a plea, and they wanted to make a case. So on behalf of, I say to them, thank you, because they're putting their, they're taking a big chance. I mean, this could go sideways on them, and they could end up facing either big fines or something even worse, like jail time. So, but back to today, we've seen today in court, and I'm not there, and I really wish I was there. Like I'm still thinking about jumping on the plane at the end of this week and going there for week 2, but we're hearing all sorts of really interesting things. I'd say right now the government is unorganized, completely unorganized. They've had a year to make their case, and they're collecting all sorts of evidence, and it's like their evidence is so thin, so contradictory, and so damaging, which is the other beauty of a trial like this. When in Canada and in US, most jurisdictions, during a trial, you have an evidence disclosure portion. So that's one of the good reasons for Tamara and Chris wanting to go to trial, because it allows their lawyers to then ask to see the evidence, all the stuff, the emails and the memos. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing just how dysfunctional and disorganized the Ottawa government, the Ottawa, bureaucracy was, the police force, the Ontario police, everything. So it's, similar to some of the other cases lately. I think hopefully it's good for us. It's good for Canadians. We're going to get some good stuff that comes out of this. Hopefully it's not bad for Tamara and Chris.
Yeah.
And I don't think it can be bad. I mean, let's be honest. Trudeau's in a lot of shit, and if he makes a martyr out of these two, like like I said, I'm that close to jumping on a plane to fly back out there. If they get convicted, there's going to be 100,000 people storming back in Ottawa. That's my opinion.
That's what I think, and like a lot of people are thinking that Trudeau is going to try to tip the scales with his favor. And this is the way it's been, right? Throughout this whole process, we've seen, the POEC, we've seen all these other cases where these liberal judges, known donors, get put on the case, and then it goes in one direction.
If this was year 3 in Trudeau's reign, if this was 2019, then I'd be really scared for Chris and Tamara. But I think most people are, we've seen that there are finally a lot of senior bureaucrats, senior civil servants, senior judges, people like that are looking beyond the Trudeau era, knowing that the Trudeau era is coming to an end. And I mean, I'm still naive that way. I still believe that there are people that are well-intentioned and will do the right job. And so a judge who arbitrates on this, I mean, he's got to be like this. We live in a country of precedent law. So if he finds them guilty and gives them some sort of nasty sentence, this is a nasty precedent. It closes the door on free speech. It makes it puts us one step closer to a totalitarian government on the bad side, or I can use it to my advantage. In the future, I'll be on every judge's case going, well, that guy who just committed a drug felony over there, then you got to put him in jail, because we're raising the bar on what the definition of a crime is, or we're raising the bar on the definition of a totalitarian government. So there's a judge somewhere here who's going to have to weigh a lot of things when making his judgment at the end of this, in about a month from now. So.
And well, they're not making themselves look any more popular in Canada, and the image that they're showing, like from all of these institutions, whether it's from the judiciary, from the politicians, from the bureaucrats, and from the media, the image that they're giving out is terrible. And this is actually even some footage from today. This was a clip. You don't need to hear the audio, but the clip is of Tamara coming in, and one of the reporters knocks over the bike of a homeless person. And Tamara immediately jumps to the aid and helps him out with his bike, puts his bike up. But the reporters are just, bump over people, knock people over. They have no care in the world. And this just goes to show the difference between people like Tamara, average Canadians. We have a completely different sight of how we behave around people than these people in these institutions. And it's sickening. It's sickening, really.
And kudos to her and Chris. I mean, they got the patience more patience than I could ever imagine, because just walking by there and having insults yelled at them and whatnot, it's frustrating. I had a thought, but I just lost. So did you see some of the things that came out today? There was a few interesting things. So one of the funny things that came, well, funny, not funny, is, we said they were calling it a so-called freedom convoy.
Right.
They can't call it an occupation now. That's the other thing that happened this morning. So every time the Crown lawyers were using the word occupation, then Tamara and Chris's lawyers, the defense lawyers, stood up and argued it, and finally said, listen, it's not an occupation. The definition of an occupation, the legal definition of an occupation, it has to be a foreign sovereign group, and they have to occupy you with force. So stop calling it that. And it was, it became frustrating for the lawyers, because every time you use the word occupation, then there was an objection. And finally the judge said, enough is enough. It's not an occupation. You can't use the term. So little victories like that go a long way. Go a long.
That's really big, because I sat through the entire POEC, the inquiry for the Emergencies Act, and it was just time after time, and they just kept insisting on this like baited language, this kind of language that's geared towards framing it in a particular way rather than using the actual terms. And again, the so-called term, you're saying so-called something. I mean, what are you going to say? So-called Prime Minister of Canada, the so-called government of Canada, the so-called lawyers that are representing this case. It's childish at best.
But unfortunately that is what most trials are, right? It's two sides arguing over the definition of words at some point. I mean, they're going to spend 2 days arguing over one sentence uttered what's the word? when Tamara was being put in handcuffs at the very last minute and she was being taken away, she turned around and she said, "Hold the line." That's going to be a core aspect of this whole court case, is what did she mean by hold the line? Was hold the line, literally a war term like, stand your ground and battle, or was it just more like stay true to your values? And so they're going to argue and that's what a trial like this ends up being. It's going to be interesting. I mean, like I said, I hope it's a positive verdict for one way or another. They're going to find them guilty of mischief. I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, I just hope it ends up being a slap on the wrist and, time served and a few hundred hours of community work. But in the process, all this evidence discovery is going to be fantastic. Like that's, and we're seeing that already, that the police reports, and they're questioning the police on their reports, and they're like, what did you, they're being made to look like fools because they strap together a bunch of evidence to try and make this case, and they had none. They had no case for any of this. Anyways, it's day 2 of a 2-week trial, so we'll talk about this again next week, I'm sure.
Well, 16 days, so they're going to stretch that out for a long time. I don't know if it's an everyday occurrence that they go to court every single day. So 16 days can actually go quite some time.
I'll make some inquiries, see if it has to go to 16 days. I mean, I could imagine that the Crown at some point is going to feel like idiots and say, enough is enough. I mean, 16
they
days.
Don't feel like idiots already. I don't know.
Yeah, think of the money being spent. Wow.
Well, yeah, it's unbelievable. And speaking about spending money, if you're thinking about spending money on any lubricants or anything like that, you might want to go out and do it now, because it looks like
for 2 reasons.
Okay, you got me there. Yeah. So, WD-40 is on the ban list, and WD-40, for those whoever thought that was a lubricant, get that out of your head. It's not a lubricant. Stop thinking that it's a lubricant. At best, it's a spray for your flies when you go fishing. It's a spray to rub down rockets. That's what it was designed for. Water displacement.
It's water dispersant number 40. So they had 40 recipes of I don't know if it was NASA, Morton Thyrocol, or somebody like that, but they wanted to spray something that would displace the water when they were assembling rockets. Something like that.
Yeah. And people found a number of other uses for it. But what was in the story, what was in the news today, and what really caught my eye was a channel that I follow. I love his channel, and I watch it all the time. I've been watching it for years. AVE. For those that don't know his channel, go over, check it out. You'll love it. It's right up your alley if you watch us. It's that kind of thing. But he was talking about a ban on these aerosolized volatile
organic
compounds. That's it. So these are things that are found not just in WD-40, not just brake clean, not just your starter fluid, things like that. You'll find them in everything.
It could be a lady's hairspray. Could be hairspray, insect repellent. They're all in the same category.
That's right. And they actually have a list on the government website. And again, I'll leave a link in the description so you can go check out what items might be on there. Look, deodorant for human exelia. Like, we've got all kinds of things. So your whatever spray on deodorant, no good anymore. They're going to get rid of all of this stuff in the name of getting rid of smog. And that's the ban, because it's all to save the planet from global warming. One of the things that I discovered in this, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, watch, there's going to be such hypocrisy in this, because it's all about global warming, right? Well, immediately they have exemptions to this. So what are the exemptions? Well, these regulations do not apply in respect to products that are, and under the D category, you have manufactured or imported for export only. So for a global,
so we'll be able to make WD-40 here, but we can't use it here. We can make it and sell it to the Chinese, but we can't use it for ourselves. Something like that.
Something along those lines. Yeah, we can make it and sell it. We just can't consume it here because the consumption of it may lead to global warming. Somehow it's Canada warming. It's not global warming anymore. But
it's so similar to so many other things, Clyde. I mean, we can mine coal here and ship it to China, and they can build 2 new power plants every week and burn Canadian coal in their plants, but we can't burn Canadian coal here. No, we're again, yes, it's a bit of hypocrisy, but it's a theme we've talked about. It's a drop in the bucket, right? The Canadian volume of aerosols compared to Americans or Chinese. Again, we're leading by example in a category where it doesn't matter. Like it's a frustrating exercise for nothing. We're gonna. I haven't even thought about it too much, but I'm sure if I think about it, it's one of those things where it's going to have a counterintuitive negative impact of some sort, right? And I don't know what it is, but if you think about it, eliminating the WD-40 from a mechanic's arsenal of tools, he's going to replace it with something else that in many instances is worse. Actually, an example of that is weirdly, I thought of that about this, but I remember reading a story where they said that liquor stores could not refrigerate beer. So they were proposing that liquor stores could no longer refrigerate beer because it was a waste of energy. And then when somebody did the proper math, they said, well, the liquor store refrigerates beer that's keeps it cool. It's already been refrigerated somewhere else and does it more efficiently because they have a bigger refrigeration system. And if we don't refrigerate in the liquor store and everybody brings it home and individually refrigerates with their own fridge, it's worse for the environment. So so I don't know how, but I'm sure this is in that category. It's a feel-good rule that's going to have.
Well, I know for one, we're going to have to supply our own spray bottles for a lot of these things. So we're not getting rid of WD-40 altogether. Right. It's just we're not allowed to aerosolize it anymore. So we'll be able to sell it in bulk or whatever, and then you'll have to transfer it into these other containers. And then there's going to be way more spillage. There's going to be more of this stuff. There's going to be more waste. And who knows if people are over aerosoling their bottles, and then it leads to more aerosolization of this stuff because they're over pumping them. And
now the joke I said earlier, I don't know what you thought my joke was, but the reason I said get it now is because if you can get it from the US or wherever some of these products come from, get them now because the Canadian dollar is tanking again, and costs of goods that we import from the US are going up. And the reason why is it's a segue. We wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
The Bank of Canada today surprised many by not increasing the interest rate. And they kept it at 5.
My bet was on
surprised me.
50 basis points was my bet. I thought it was going to go up by 0.5%.
And I read that. I went to the Bank of Canada this morning and I read their explanation for it, and I found their explanation rather weak. And I tweeted about it. I think it was political interference. I mean, there was Doug Ford and your premier, I can't remember his name,
David Eby. He actually went on a press conference and he spoke in front of people saying, "Bank of Canada, do the right thing. Where people are hurting." Yeah. And Global News actually, they had a real estate agent come on and say, "We're really suffering here. Nobody's feeling sorry."
So the people who got us in trouble are interfering with the people who are trying to get us out of trouble. I mean,
absolutely, that's the case.
I hope to think that the Bank of Canada was still trying to do the right thing, and somehow or other they're not. Now, if it's a pause, so they gave themselves a lot of leeway. They basically said they're not confident that the economy and the inflation is under control. So they really left themselves a door open to continue their increases. Their excuses right now, I mean, they said there was a contraction in the GDP by about 0.2%, and they blamed the contraction on climate change, on forest fires, and it always comes back to the same old
whatever they've got.
It was really weakly, poorly written. The Bank of Canada fell. It had to come up with a narrative to justify holding the line. But you and I know if the Bank of Canada doesn't match interest rates with the Americans, then we're going to suddenly devalue the Canadian dollar even further. I mean, I look today that the Canadian dollar is at 73 cents US. Like that's getting into that, historical low territories again, when you get to 68, 69 cents. So Canadians are doomed on two ends. I mean, what's the worst pill to swallow? Interest rates, which affect mostly housing, or a low dollar, which affects almost everything we buy, food and cars and other things from the US. It's like, I wish the government wouldn't interfere. I hope they're not interfering too much, because it's a hard pill to swallow. We have to fix this economy. The economy is not looking good right now. It's just not.
Well, I think it was a big shock in the first place. So just about a year and a half ago, Tiff McClellan, what's his name? Tiff McClellan, the president, the president, the governor of the Bank of Canada. He came out and he said, don't worry. People are worried right now. We're going to keep interest rates very low for a very long time. If you want, go out, get that mortgage, get that car, and to make your payments. Don't worry about it. Like, straight up told us that that's what it was going to go. So we know that this is an external force. This is something that he had no control over. They didn't see coming. They needed to act and bring those interest rates up. This is
my favorite quote along those lines, though, is Trudeau turning to the reporter Glenn and going, "Glenn, the interest rates are at an all-time low." And then,
well, yeah, and that was to answer the question: what are we going to do? What are future governments going to do when they have to pay back this debt? And, if interest rates go up, this debt will become very expensive. And that's what it has done, precisely that. And I don't think that interest rates are done going up. I think that there's so much malinvestment in the market. And there's also...
They're not done. I mean, like the consumer price index was 3.3% last month. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm pretty sure it's going up. In fact, what would have been interesting is, we're reading a press release by the Bank of Canada. They do a verbal report next month. So next month we'll get to see the body language of Tiff to see but I guarantee you, if he had made that as an announcement this morning and had to justify it, I bet you his body language would have been quite telling. I've seen a few other interviews with him on CNN and other things where he wants to bring the economy under control, and he's not comfortable having to pause it. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah, I mean, my purview on this one is, if you have so much malinvestment in a marketplace, the interest rates have to come up. It has to really quash spending on particular things and bid prices down on a lot of things. And unfortunately, the one big price that's going to have to be bid down is housing pricing. And there's this interesting push and pull situation. And I've been thinking about this because we have prices are far too high, and we need people to invest and buy into these properties. Now, as prices come down, the prices of lumber and all these other things are not coming down. So builders, as the economy slows down, are backing away from projects. They're slowing down projects. They're stopping projects. They're canceling projects, and they're not going to be building houses. But at the same time, we have an influx of immigration that's just going to compound the demand on new housing. So we have this interesting scenario where we have a tremendous amount of demand, not a lot of supply, and actually a dwindling amount of supply, which is crazy, because it would create this, you would expect, if there's a lot of demand and a lot of supply, that that's a signal for entrepreneurs and business people to get into building homes. But all the other factors are keeping them away from doing it, because it would just be a huge cost to them.
Well, I mean, there's entrepreneurs are scared to come. I mean, again, I'm sorry to the viewers. I'm speaking very specifically about Alberta, but that's a graph that was released not too long ago. Just for your viewers, like I subscribe to some of these websites, and I look at this kind of data every couple of days when it comes up. So that that's what we're looking at. And so the government of Alberta just published the capital, the monthly or the quarterly capital investment in the province. And the quarterly capital investment in the province is down by $10 billion a quarter. Well, $10 billion a quarter is $40 billion a year. And so it came down in about 2015 when we elected Notley, and it's not coming back in. So investors, we need investors, foreign investors. I don't care, like people say, we'll just build the houses here. Canada is 3% of the world economy. So we need money from somewhere else to come in and build the houses. They're afraid to come here. they've left in droves. So this is one of those things where the environmentalists did harms to themselves. Like we warn them about this, right? You're blocking pipelines. Fine, you don't want pipelines, but when you're blocking pipelines and scaring investment, you're going to scare away the investment that you want someday. So if they're scared to come here and build pipelines, they'll be scared to come and build windmills. They'll be scared to come and build houses or anything. So the investment money is not coming in because they're worried about the political climate and they're worried about the red tape. And we keep hearing about that all the time. Like there are still people who want to build houses in Canada. It's freaking complicated, man. Building a house in Canada, like if I decide I want to build a house now, I gotta go through a year of paperwork. I gotta deal with, the bureaucracy. The cities aren't releasing lands. Cities are criticized for that. Hell, did you see this week? Poilievre made a speech. He was talking about that. He just threw it off the cuff. He's like, if I get elected, I'm going to sell 6,000 unused Government of Canada buildings. Mm-hmm. And people criticize him for that, saying you're selling off to whatever, foreign interests. It's like, man, let us come up with solutions. And then he also said he was going to, free up Crown land. Like he mentioned, thousands of acres of Crown land. You know how many acres of Crown land we have in Canada? I looked it up. 899 million acres of Crown land. Yeah. So if Poilievre wants to sell 1,000 acres of Crown land to some municipality,
it'll do us all favors. Yeah, it'll all do us all a favor. But it's an interesting push and pull. And you bring up an interesting concept, and this I learned from the Mises Institute of Economics, and that's the idea of regime uncertainty. When foreign investors are just terrified to enter a region, we saw this obviously with countries like Venezuela, where entire industries were just nationalized, or they call it, or they just stole it. They looted their entire industry, took all the capital that they put in.
Venezuela, Ecuador, Cuba, lots of places.
And Canada is now on that list. Canada is now on that list of places where it's a hostile environment for people that want to bring in.
Clyde, I worked on I think we talked about this before, but I worked on a $10 billion project, for about 3 years, 2018 to recently. And we were trying to raise money. We actually got pretty far. We got the engineering done, everything else. This is the Goldboro project on the East Coast. It's an LNG facility. And I sat in the room with bankers from all sorts of countries. And I remember sitting in the room with bankers from Malaysia. We went to Malaysia and we sat in the room with bankers from Malaysia, and they told us doing business in Canada was too risky. And he almost said, Canada is a third world country when it comes to doing business. And I'm like, wow, who would you rather do business with? And he rhymed them off, right? He'd rather go do business with India, Israel, South Africa. He named off all sorts of countries that, almost all of Europe, and they didn't want to do business with us.
That's shameful. That's shameful.
It is shameful because, and for for the same reasons we mentioned. I mean, they're scared of the environmentalists. They're scared of the time to get projects done is so long that the time value of money gets eroded. So if you invest today and you don't start getting a return on your investment 3 years, 4 years down the road, that's too long. And then the other thing they're always scared is these constant change of governments and crazy governments that have crazy ideas. So we need to bring the country under control.
Yeah, well, I think my fear is that the only thing that'll bring us under control is when we get $20 bacon. And I stand by that. When people can't afford to eat, that's when they're going to really want real change. And it's not going to be for the environmentalists, because that's what brought us here today. And that's why we can't, lube our door hinges in our house anymore. And that's where we're at. So I wanted to get on this because there is a bit of regime change going on, or the possibility of regime change in parts of the country. All of Canada would be happy to have a national election right now, but it looks like we might be having a provincial election. You were telling me this before we.
Yeah, we're having our, we're getting our fix on the elections vicariously through provinces. So Manitoba is the newest one. So yesterday, Manitoba is currently a conservative province, barely, similar to Alberta was, and announced an election. So their election is 28 days from now. Looking at the polls, it's 50-50. And I saw a map of Manitoba, and I might as well have been looking at a map of Alberta. It's blue in the rural areas, and then you got Winnipeg and a few other big cities that are orange. So very similar to what we had in Alberta, a big divide between rural votes and city votes. And cities across Canada. I don't know when they're going to learn their lessons, but the big cities across Canada keep voting for Liberal and socialist, governments. I mean, God, let's speak about that one real quick. Did you see the news, the riots we had in Calgary this week? So we had 150 people in the northeast part of Calgary, mostly Ethiopians, Eritreans, whatever they are.
Yeah,
and
I
they
couldn't
were like,
pronounce the name. I did it, and I said it
and
in
they
a
were
video.
clashing with each other, with 2x4s and machetes and the whole bit. The police went as far as issuing a warning and telling people stay out of the area and so forth. But that to me, that is a direct result of electing mayors that are weak on crime and don't give a shit about this kind of stuff. And Gondek, our mayor, didn't say a word. She wouldn't dare say a word about that.
So this is actually an issue that's been happening. It's happened elsewhere in the world, where these people from this place in Africa, I can never pronounce the name of it right, Eritrea or something. Anyway, they have two factions. The conflict continues even when they go to foreign countries. So they're in conflict here. I mean, they're coming over in refugee status or you just straight immigration. But then, I mean, you're not a refugee if you're bringing your conflict with you. You're not running away from anything. You're running to it in foreign countries. Recently, it happened in Tel Aviv, I believe it was, in Israel. Yeah. And Benjamin Netanyahu just said, "We're rounding him up and we're sending him home." Any one of them that's proved to be in this
absolutely thing. And we're welcoming, but I mean the abuse that we're willing to take, I don't know when it's going to be when Canadians are going to say enough is enough. But yeah, they started breaking properties and vandalizing stuff while they're fighting among each other. So but back to Manitoba. So yeah, Manitoba is having an election. So it'll be welcome to Canada, right? This is why I love this show with you, Vlad, because every week it's like we can go round and round, and there's consequences to everything, and you and I and your viewers can see the consequences. I just wish the government would see the consequences of their actions. I mean,
it's the problem with ideology. Like when people are ideologues, they get blinded by anything around them and any evidence to the contrary of their thing. And in fact, more people become more steadfast in the face of evidence against the thing that they're so fervent about. And it's
well, absolutely. Like closer to your neck of the woods, let's talk about Jagmeet Singh. I mean, he's on a weird tear these days. He's criticizing the banks and he's criticizing the grocery stores, and in fact I'd say he's more responsible for higher costs than anybody else, but he's deflecting and he's blaming others. But he did something really, I found it kind of weird today. He met that lady and he had an interview with that lady, and the lady is a musician who had to come out of retirement, and she's like, she's whining that she had to come out of retirement because the cost of living is so high and she can't make ends meet. And she's endorsing Jagmeet. And, I made a bit of an unpopular post on Twitter, but I'm like, I have no sympathy for that lady, because at some point, you're shaking hands with the man who's actually making your life more miserable, and you're endorsing a man whose policies are making your life miserable. So sorry, lady, but my sympathy's not there.
Yeah, I would sympathize with someone who just wants to be left alone to be able to take care of themselves, and the government's gotten too much in their way. I would definitely sympathize with that a lot more than somebody who's asking for the government to come in and take things from other people and give it to you. I mean, this is always the draw of socialism. It's always the draw of, I can get stuff. Free stuff's great, right?
Well, Jagmeet always says, like, he has a key phrase. It's like, I'll work to put more money in your pockets. It's like, how about you work to let me keep the money in my pockets? Like, not put it in my pockets. Let me keep it in my pockets.
Well, I think at the same time, it's a bit of a failure on our part. So like, you take a little bit of the responsibility on this side is not being able to communicate with people that are naive to this kind of propaganda or whatever it is that's being taught to them, that that they can get a free lunch if it's just given to them by the government, and they don't realize that governments don't actually have money. They have your money, and they're going to do stuff with your money, and that's really what it is.
And you and I do this, and luckily you have a great audience and people listen, but we're preaching to the converted. I mean, I read the comments. The people who follow you get this. I wish that the people who don't get this would be watching this. How do I get that lady to watch some of our videos or educate ourselves on the real impacts of these terrible policies,
Well, and some of these policies lead to, well, and this is the segue, CERB. They lead to giving out money because there's a crisis, or giving out money and then hoping that giving money out is going to fix the problem. Now, I understand if there's going to be an emergency or something like that, that perhaps we can have emergency ordinances. But every time it seems that there's an emergency and the government steps in, they just create more havoc. We're seeing this with the wildfires. They're just causing more trouble. We see this with the Hurricane Fiona that hit the East Coast. And that was they just came in and caused more problems. They didn't actually, all the carbon taxes that we collected didn't go to any of the people there. They came in, they said, we'll double your contributions if you decide to do it out of your own pocket. Well, I've been doing it out of my pocket for years to the government directly, so take care of them, would you? Unfortunately, every time that they do, they cause more issues. And CERB was one of these. It's caused a lot of issues for a lot of people. They were relying on it. And abuse. And this is but this is so predictable, right? This is so absolutely predictable that people were going to abuse these things. As we know, like the average person who's just honest and going to do everything, they always have the hardest time getting through all the paperwork. It's the fraudsters that are real proficient at paperwork, and they know all the ins and outs of it, and they know all the way around it. And they're the ones who are going to benefit the most out of it. It's the average Joe that's just like, I just work every day, and now I got to go like learn how to be a bureaucrat for a few months to survive. That's
But
the
did
problem.
Did you see what was announced about CERB? So we knew a couple of weeks ago there was an announcement that that the Canada Revenue Agency was investigating. Don't quote me, but I think they said at the time 600 people for abuse for collecting CERB when internal people, not Canadians. I mean, they're already investigating Canadians. Millions of Canadians got CERB that shouldn't have gotten it. That's bad enough. But we learned that they were investigating their own internal Canada Revenue Agency people. And then this week they just announced that they fired 120 of them. So of the 600 or so that they were investigating, they fired 120. And, you and I know that's the tip of the iceberg. So if 120 people at Revenue Canada got fired, there had to be a whole bunch that got slapped on the wrist, and there had to be a whole bunch of abuse. And that's a terrible kind of abuse, because those are the people we have to trust, right? When you and I file our taxes, we're expecting fair treatment from the Revenue Canada people. And now we're learning that they're the ones cheating the system. That's and I posted on this. I'm glad that some of those people got fired. That's fine.
Yeah.
I hope some of them got investigated, because if you and I cheated Revenue Canada, they would have no problem coming after you. If Revenue Canada audited you and found out that you collected 20,000 wrongfully, they'd take the 20,000 from you. They'd hit you with a fine, and they might do worse. But what I'm upset about this is that Bob Hamilton, the Commissioner of Revenue Canada, he didn't resign over this, and neither did Petit Pas, whatever the first name is. The minister didn't resign. Like, the buck has to stop somewhere, and this is the most frustrating part for me, is that nobody's accountable. There's some big cheating going on in one of the most important government of Canada departments, and there's no accountability. The managers just all go on, and they'll do like the managers at the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Association and the Bank of Canada. They'll pay themselves bonuses at the end of the year.
Yeah, likely. But what gets me the most is like what you were alluding to there, is if you say, like, declare your taxes wrong, even inadvertently, there's a disclaimer on there that you can go to jail for this. And this is the thing. These people have been investigated. They had an internal investigation. They were found to have committed fraud. They have defrauded the taxpayer, and they're just let go. And this has been an ongoing thing.
I mean, that we know of. I mean, maybe some of them got fined or something like that.
My assumption, because of previous hearings that were conducted on these things, they found that other people were fired. They had big chunks of departments that were fired off, and they asked them specifically when these people were fired for fraud, mind you. Like, for being found guilty internally of fraud, was this then filed off to the RCMP, and they said no,
Right.
it wasn't.
No.
No, we don't give it to the. And
In
that should
fact,
be the case. That should be part of the
it
process.
should be the case, and in fact, you're making me think that some of them are probably going to get fired with a package and some sort of non-disclosure agreement, because think about it, some of the people getting fired know a lot of what's going on. So that, it might even be ugly in there. Some guy is going to get fired and he's going to say, well, I know who else collected. So probably more to come on this one. Actually, I'm not going to let this one go. I'm going to keep tweeting about this one, and I want to see this is the kind of stuff where somebody, a journalist with more resources should be filing access to information requests and get some information on what's going on, because this is a big one, and it's a big one that we're not hearing about at all.
And
this is a big deal.
Unfortunately, this stuff runs quite deep. Well, you know Vesper D, a mutual friend of both of us. He's been doing a lot of research into Canada and just evidence of bribery, fraud, these kinds of things, going back all the way to the inception of the country, and finding out that there really isn't any laws to prevent them from doing what they do, or even going after them afterwards. I'm talking about the political class, of course, not just the bureaucracy. Yeah. And it would almost be interesting if the three of us got together and had a conversation with that, because that is just, it's a big one to get into.
It's a big one. I've never worked in government. My only comparisons are the private sector. I worked for many companies that had policies against receiving gifts. I would issue contracts worth, millions of dollars, and it was very, 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 very strict. I mean, if, most companies I worked had some sort of limit, like $100. If you get $100 gift from somebody, and a gift is anything, like if somebody takes me out for lunch and I decide to have, the best champagne or the best scotch that they got, and it's $150 bill, I was expected to report it. But beyond that, in the private sector, I would have never risked my job. Like if I had to report it, I reported it, because I wasn't going to risk my job over $100 glass of scotch. But
not only that, in the private sector, you got to watch out, because we've seen cases where this white collar crime, we hear about it, they're not walking out with their box in their hand with their goods, they're walking out with cuffs on. And that should be what's happening on these cases when it comes to the government. If the fact that they're not even giving referrals to the RCMP to investigate into the matters that they've already investigated and hand over the file, then there's a serious problem systemically in our country.
Speaking of Vesper, I mean, he posted today, that conversation between Jody Wilson-Raybould and whatever the president of the Privy Council, whatever his name was, Michael at the time, and like. Sure, it's old news. It's 3 years ago, but it's still surfacing. I mean, she was the governor, the attorney general, and she was being pressured to break the law. I was surprised. She actually held back, but then she held back, stuck to her guns, did the right thing, and in the end, it cost her her job. So there's a couple of
and they went ahead with it anyway with David Lametti.
Yeah,
they just went ahead with it. Bye. You lose your job, get the guy in that will do the job, and that's their MO. That seems to be it.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. Hey, let's finish on a high note.
Okay. It happens. It happens.
I don't know what the high note would be. Actually, my funny high note right now, maybe it's not funny. Did you see the video of Joe Biden giving the Medal of Honor to that man? So in the U.S.,
no, I didn't.
Yesterday, a Vietnam era guy got the Medal of Honor. I mean, he committed an act of heroism in the 1960s during the Vietnam War, and it took 40 years for him to get his Medal of Honor. Wow. So the guy receiving the Medal of Honor is 81. Joe Biden's 80 years old. And Joe put the medal around the guy's neck, and then he's supposed to say a few things and turn to the camera and do whatever. But then Joe turned around and he heard applause, and like a puppy or whatever, I don't know what applause does to him, but it makes him think that he has to walk out. He just turned away and walked off the stage and disappeared.
Get out of town.
I mean, like, it's funny, but it's sad. It's funny, but it's sad. It's sad for Joe, but I don't feel too bad for him, because die by the sword, live by the sword, die by the sword. I feel terrible for that veteran, that soldier who, at the end of his life finally gets the recognition that he deserves, and it's an embarrassment. And it's sad, because I often look at the U.S. wondering if the U.S. are going to come to our rescue. And right now I'm like, God, are we going to have to go rescue the Americans?
Oh,
like,
no. Well, if we look at the leadership between the two countries, what's worse, having a geriatric or having an idiot?
yeah. Yeah, ours is worse. We got an idiot. We got an idiot. We got an idiot who's hiding right now. And hey, this was good. I honestly, I thought we weren't going to have too much to talk about, and look at all the time went
Look
by.
at the
It's like
time.
40 minutes.
So, Marty, where
That's
can
awesome.
everybody find you?
Marty Up North on Twitter, and Marty Up North on YouTube, and still working on my YouTube video. I just finished a long trip, so I got a lot of footage to edit, and it's going to take me months. So be patient with me, folks, but it'll be worth it. I had a pretty awesome trip recently.
Awesome. Links is always in the description down below. Go check it out. We'll see you next time.
All right. Cheers, folks.